Gustav I, born Gustav Eriksson of the Vasa noble family and later known as Gustav Vasa, was King of Sweden from 1523 until his 1560 death, previously self-recognized protector of the realm from 1521, during the ongoing Swedish War of Liberation against King Christian II of Denmark, Norway and Sweden. Initially of low standing, Gustav rose to lead the rebel movement following the Stockholm Bloodbath, in which his father perished. Gustav's election as king on June 6, 1523 and his triumphant entry into Stockholm 11 days later meant the end of medieval Sweden's elective monarchy and the Kalmar Union, and the birth of a hereditary monarchy under the House of Vasa and its successors, including the current House of Bernadotte. As king, Gustav proved an enigmatic administrator with a ruthless streak not inferior to his predecessors, brutally suppressing subsequent uprisings. He worked to raise taxes, end feudalism and bring about a Swedish Reformation, replacing the prerogatives of local landowners, noblemen and clergy with centrally appointed governors and bishops. His 37-year rule, which was the longest of a mature Swedish king to that date, saw a complete break with not only the Danish supremacy but also the Roman Catholic Church, whose assets were nationalized, with the Lutheran Church of Sweden established under his personal control. He became the first truly autocratic native Swedish sovereign and was a skilled propagandist and bureaucrat, with his main opponent, Christians, infamous mark as the Tyrant King, and his largely fictitious adventures during the liberation struggle still widespread to date. Due to a vibrant dynastic succession, his three sons, Erik, Johan and Karl IX, all held the kingship at different points. Gustav I has subsequently been labeled the founder of modern Sweden, and the father of the nation. Gustav liked to compare himself to Moses, whom he believed to have also liberated his people and established a sovereign state. As a person, Gustav was known for ruthless methods and a bad temper, but also a fondness for music and had a certain sly wit and ability to outmaneuver and annihilate his opponents. He founded one of the now oldest orchestras of the world, the Kungliga Huvudkapellet. Royal housekeeping accounts from 1526 mention 12 musicians including wind players and a timpanist but no string players. Today the Kungliga Huvudkapellet is the orchestra of the Royal Swedish Opera. Early life, Gustav Eriksson, a son of Cecilia Majensdotter and Erik Johansson Vasa, was probably born in 1496. The birth most likely took place in Rydboholm Castle, northeast of Stockholm, the manor house of the father, Erik. The newborn got his name, Gustav, from Erik's grandfather Gustav Eriksson. Erik Johansson's parents were Johan Kristersson and Birgitta Gustafsdotter of the dynasties Vasa and Sture respectively, both dynasties of high nobility. Birgitta Gustafsdotter was the sister of Sten Sture the Elder, regent of Sweden. Being a relative and ally of Uncle Sten Sture, Erik inherited the regent's estates in Uppland and Paragraf-Dermanland when the latter died in 1503. Although a member of a family with considerable property since childhood, Gustav Eriksson would later be the holder of possessions of a much greater dimension. According to genealogical research, Birgitta Gustafsdotter and Sten Sture were descended from King Sverker II of Sweden, through King Sverker's granddaughter Benediktsdotter. One of King Gustav's great-grandmothers was a half-sister of King Charles VIII of Sweden. Resistance against the Danish. Supporting the Sture party. Since the end of the 14th century, Sweden had been a part of the Kalmar Union with Denmark and Norway. The Danish dominance in this union occasionally led to uprisings in Sweden. During Gustav's childhood, parts of the Swedish nobility tried to make Sweden independent. Gustav and his father Erik supported the party of Sten Sture the Younger, regent of Sweden from 1512, and its struggle against the Danish king Christian II. Following the Battle of Bracarency-Nunkika in 1518, where Sten Sture's troops beat the Danish forces, it was decided that Sten Sture and King Christian would meet in Österåker for negotiations. To guarantee the safety of the king, the Swedish side sent 6 men as hostages to be kept by the Danes for as long as the negotiations lasted. However, Christian did not show up for the negotiations, violated the deal with the Swedish side and took the hostages aboard ships carrying them to Copenhagen. The 6 members of the kidnapped hostage were Hem and Gad, Lars Suggestion, Jar Paragraph Rand Suggestion, Olavrinning, Bengt Nilsson Euro, and Gustav Eriksson. Gustav was held in Kalle slot where he was treated very well after promising he would not make attempts to escape. A reason for this gentle treatment was King Christian's hope to convince the 6 men to switch sides, and turn against their leader Stenstjere. This strategy was successful regarding all men but Gustav, who stayed loyal to the Stjere party. In 1519, Gustav Eriksson escaped from Kalle. He fled to the Hanseatic city of Lawan-Quarterbeck where he arrived on September 30. How he managed to escape is not certain, but according to a somewhat likely story, he disguised himself as a bullocky. For this, Gustav Eriksson got the nicknames King Oxtail, and Gustav Cowbutt, something he indeed disliked. When a swordsman drank to His Majesty Gustav Cowbutt in Kalmar in 1547, the swordsman was killed. While staying in Lawan-Quarterbeck, Gustav could hear about developments in his native Sweden. While he was there, Christian II mobilized to attack Sweden in an effort to seize power from Stenstjere and his supporters. In 1520, the forces of King Christian were triumphant. Stenstjere died in March, but some strongholds, including the Swedish capital Stockholm, were still able to withstand the Danish forces. Gustav left Lawan-Quarterbeck on a ship, and was put ashore south of Kalmar on May 31. It seems Gustav stayed largely inactive during his first months back on Swedish soil. According to some sources, Gustav received an invitation to the Coronation of Christian. This was to take place in the newly captured Stockholm in November. Even though King Christian had promised amnesty to his enemies within the Stjere party, including Gustav Eriksson, the latter chose to decline the invitation. The coronation took place on November 4 and days of festivities in a friendly spirit followed. When the celebration had lasted a few days, the castle was locked and the former enemies of King Christian were imprisoned. Accusations against the old supporters of Stenstjere regarding heresy were brought forward. The following day the sentences were announced. During the Stockholm Bloodbath, close to 100 people were executed on Stortorget, among them Gustav Eriksson's father, Erik Johansson, and nephew, Joachim Brahe. Gustav himself was at the time staying at Rakarency FSNA close to Gripsholm Castle. In Dalarna Gustav Eriksson had reasons to fear for his life and left Rakarency FSNA. He travelled to the province of Dalarna, in what was then northwestern Sweden. What happened there has been described in Peder Svart's Chronicle, which can be described as a strongly biased heroic tale about Gustav Eriksson. The Dalarna adventures of Gustav that could be described as a part of the national heritage of Sweden, can therefore not be verified in a satisfying way. He is supposed to have tried to gather troops among the peasantry in the province, but with little success initially. Being chased by men loyal to King Christian and failing at creating an army to challenge the king, Gustav Eriksson had no other alternative but to flee to Norway. While he made his way from Mora via Lima to Norway, people that had recently turned down Gustav's call for support against the king changed their minds. Representatives of that group caught up with Gustav before he had reached Norway and convinced him to follow them back to Mora. Gustav Eriksson's run towards Norway and back has formed the background to the famous cross-country ski race Vasaloppet. Swedish War of Liberation Gustav Eriksson was appointed paragraph bitsman. The rebel force he led grew. In February 1520 it consisted of 400 men, mainly from the area around Lake Siljan. The first big clash in the dissolution of Kalmar Union that now started, took place at Brunbäckarency's ferry in April, where a rebel army defeated an army loyal to the king. The sacking of the city of Vakarency and with it controlling important copper and silver mines gave Gustav Vasa resources and supporters flocked to him. Other parts of Sweden, for example the Paragrafterland provinces of Småland and Vakarency Paragrafterland, also saw rebellions. The leading noblemen of Paragrafterland joined Gustav Eriksson's forces and, in Vadstena in August, they declared Gustav regent of Sweden. The election of Gustav Eriksson as a regent made many Swedish nobles, who had so far stayed loyal to King Christian, switched sides. Some noblemen, still loyal to the king, chose to leave Sweden, while others were killed. As a result, the Swedish Privy Council lost old members who were replaced by supporters of Gustav Eriksson. Most fortified cities and castles were conquered by Gustav's rebels, but the strongholds with the best defences, including Stockholm, were still under Danish control. In 1522, after negotiations between Gustav Eriksson's people and Johan Quarterbeck, the Hanseatic city joined the war against Denmark. The winter of 1523 saw the joint forces attack the Danish and Norwegian areas of Scania, Halland, Bleking and Bohuslän. During this winter, Christian II was overthrown and replaced by Frederick I. The new king openly claimed the Swedish throne and had hopes Johan Quarterbeck would abandon the Swedish rebels. The German city, preferring an independent Sweden to a strong Kalmar Union dominated by Denmark, took advantage of the situation and put pressure on the rebels. The city wanted privileges on future trade as well as guarantees regarding the loans they had granted the rebels. The Privy Council and Gustav Eriksson knew the support from Johan Quarterbeck was absolutely crucial. As a response, the council decided to appoint Gustav Eriksson king. Election as king. The ceremonial election of the regent Gustav Eriksson as King of Sweden took place when the leading men of Sweden got together in enigmatic in June 1523. When the councillors of Sweden had chosen Gustav as king, he met with the two visiting councillors of Johan Quarterbeck. The German representatives supported the appointment without hesitation and declared it an act of God. Gustav stated he had to bow to what was described as the will of God. In a meeting with the Privy Council, Gustav Eriksson announced his decision to accept. In the following ceremony, led by the deacon of enigmatic, Laurentius Andri, Gustav swore the royal oath. The next day, bishops and priests joined Gustav in Rogborgen where Laurentius Andri raised the Holy Sacrament above a kneeling Gustav Eriksson. Flanked by the councillors of Johan Quarterbeck, Gustav Eriksson was brought to enigmatic cathedral where the king sat down in the choir with the Swedish Privy Councillors on one side, and the Johan Quarterbeck representatives on the other. After the hymn Te Deum, Laurentius Andri proclaimed Gustav Eriksson King of Sweden. He was, however, still not crowned. In 1983, in remembrance of the election of Gustav as Swedish king on June 6, that date was declared the National Day of Sweden. The capture of Stockholm, shortly after the events of 1523 in enigmatic, a letter patent was issued to Johan Quarterbeck and its allied Hanseatic cities, who now were freed from tolls when trading in Sweden. An agreement, designed by Johan Quarterbeck negotiators, was made with the Danish defenders in Stockholm. On June 17 the rebels could enter the capital city. At midsummer, a grand entrance of King Gustav was arranged at Airport, the southern gate of Stockholm. Celebrations followed, including a mass of thanksgiving in Storkyrkan led by Peder Jakobsson. Gustav could now install himself in the Tacrona Palace. The war ends. Bailiffs, loyal to the old King Christian, were still holding castles in Finland, a part of Sweden at the time. During the summer and fall of 1523 they all surrendered. The next year, on August 24, 1524, Gustav arrived in Malmö in order to reach a settlement with Denmark and its King Frederick. The Treaty of Malmö had both positive and negative sides to it, from King Gustav's perspective. The treaty meant that Denmark-Norway acknowledged the independence of Sweden. The hopes Gustav had carried of winning further provinces were however scuttled. The treaty marked the end of the Swedish War of Liberation. The Reformation. After Gustav seized power, the previous Archbishop, Gustav Trolle, who at the time held the post of a sort of chancellor, was exiled from the country. Gustav sent a message to Pope Clement VII requesting the acceptance of a new archbishop selected by Gustav himself, Johannes Magnus. The Pope sent back his decision demanding that unlawful expulsion of Archbishop Gustav Trolle be rescinded, and that the archbishop be reinstated. Here Sweden's remote geographical location proved to have a marked impact. For the former archbishop had been allied with the Danish king, or at least was considered to have been so allied in contemporary Stockholm, and to reinstate him would be close to impossible for Gustav. The king let the Pope know the impossibility of the request, and the possible results if the Pope persisted, but for better or worse the Pope did persist, and refused to accept the king's suggestions of archbishops. At the time, incidentally and for different reasons, there were also 4 other unoccupied bishops' seats, where the king made suggestions to the Pope about candidates, but the Pope only accepted one of the candidates. Because the Pope refused to budge on the issue of Gustav Trolle, the king, influenced by Lutheran scholar Alois Petri, in 1531 took it upon himself to appoint yet another archbishop, namely the brother of Alois, Laurentius Petri. With this royal act, the Pope lost any influence over the Swedish Church. In the 1520s, the Petri brothers led a campaign for the introduction of Lutheranism. The decade saw many events which can be seen as gradual introductions of Protestantism, for instance the marriage of Alois Petri a consecrated priest and several texts published by him, advocating Lutheran dogmas. A translation of the New Testament had also been published in 1526. After the Reformation, a full translation was published in 1540 41, called the Gustav Vasa Bible. However, knowledge of Greek and Hebrew among Swedish clergymen was not sufficient for a translation from the original sources. Instead the work followed the German translation by Martin Luther in 1534. Gustav I's breaking with the Catholic Church is virtually simultaneous with Henry VIII doing the same in England. Both kings acted following a similar pattern, that is, a prolonged confrontation with the Pope culminating with the king deciding to take his own decisions independently of Rome. Further reign. Gustav encountered resistance from some areas of the country. People from Dalarna rebelled 3 times in the first 10 years of Gustav's reign, as they considered the king to have been too harsh on everyone he perceived as a supporter of the Danish, and as they resented his introduction of Protestantism. Many of those who had helped Gustav in his war against the Danes became involved in these rebellions and paid for this, several of them with their lives. Peasants in Småland rebelled in 1542, fueled by grievances over taxes, church reform and confiscation of church bells and vestments. For several months this uprising caused Gustav severe difficulties in the dense forests. The king sent a letter to the people of the province of Dalarna, requesting that they should circulate letters to every Swedish province, stating their support for the king with their troops, and urging every other province to do the same. Gustav got his troops, with whose help and, not least, with paid German mercenaries he managed to defeat the rebels in the spring of 1543. The leader of the rebels, Nils Dack, has traditionally been seen as a traitor to Sweden. His own letters and proclamations to fellow peasants focused on the suppression of Roman Catholic customs of piety, the king's requisitions of church bells and church plate to be smelted down for money and the general discontent with Gustav's autocratic measures, and the king's letters indicate that Dack had considerable military success for several months. Historical records state that Nils was seriously wounded during a battle, taking bullet wounds to both legs. If this is true, his survival may have been surprising in view of contemporary medical techniques. Some sources state that Nils was executed by quartering. Others that he was reduced to the state of an outlaw after recovering from his wounds, and killed while trying to escape through the woods on the border between Småland and then Danish Blekinge. It is said that his body parts were displayed throughout Sweden as a warning to other would-be rebels. This is uncertain, though his head was likely mounted on a pole at Kalmar. Modern Swedish scholarship has toned down criticism of Nils Dack, sometimes making him into a hero in the vein of Robin Hood, particularly in Småland. Difficulties with the continuation of the church also troubled Gustav Vasa. The 1540s saw him imposing death sentences upon both the Petri brothers, as well as his former chancellor Laurentius Andri. All of them were however granted amnesty, after spending several months in jail. In 1554–1557, he waged an inconclusive war against Ivan the Terrible of Russia. And of reign. In the late 1550s, Gustav's health declined. When his grave was opened in 1945, An examination of his corpse revealed that he had suffered chronic infections of a leg and in his jaw. He gave a so-called last speech in 1560 to the chancellors, his children and other noblemen, whereby he encouraged them to remain united. On September 29, 1560, Gustav died and was buried in the Cathedral of Uppsala. Heritage. Gustav's heritage has been disputed. In 19th-century Swedish history a folklore developed wherein Gustav was supposed to have had all kinds of adventures when he liberated Sweden from the Danes. The memory of Gustav has been honored greatly, resulting in embroidered history books, commemorative coins, and the annual ski event Vasaloppet. The city of Vasa in Finland was named after the royal House of Vasa in 1606. Gustav is currently portrayed on the 1,000 krona note. Today most of these stories are considered to have no other foundation than legend and skillful propaganda by Gustav himself during his time. Here is an example of one of his better-known adventures among the Swedish people. While Gustav was in exile from the Danish army, he was staying at a farm owned by a close friend for a day's rest. As he was warming himself in the common room, the Danish soldiers got a tip from one of the farmhands that Gustav was in his landlord's farmhouse. The Danish soldiers burst in the farmhouse and began searching in the common room for someone that would fit Gustav's description. As one of the soldiers came close to check Gustav Vasa, all of a sudden the landlady took out a bakery spade and started to hit Gustav and scolded him as a lazy farm boy, and ordered him to go out and work. The Danish soldier found it amusing and did not realize this lazy farm boy was in fact Gustav Vasa himself, who managed to slip away from danger and escape death. There are many other stories about Gustav's close encounters with death. However, it is questionable if any of his adventures really did happen or were dramatized by Gustav himself. Regardless of whether they happened or not, his adventures are still told to this day in Sweden. Gustav has been regarded by some as a power-hungry man who wished to control everything, the church, the economy, the army and all foreign affairs. But in doing this, he also did manage to unite Sweden, a country that previously had no standardized language, and where individual provinces held a strong regional power. He also laid the foundation for Sweden's professional army that was to make Sweden into a regional superpower in the 17th century. 18th century references in Britain. In 1739, the English playwright Henry Brooke wrote the play Gustav I of Vasa, dealing with the liberation of Sweden from Danish rule. However, Robert Walpole, British Prime Minister at the time, believed that the play's villain was intended to represent him, and had the play banned. The first English play to be so banned under the Licensing Act 1737. Later in the 18th century, the name Gustavus Vasa was given to Olaudah Equiano, a prominent African ex-slave living in Britain and involved in the struggle to abolish slavery. Gallery. Gustav Vasa had a series of paintings made during his reign. The originals are lost but watercolor reproductions of unknown date remain. These paintings show Gustav's triumphs, showing what Gustav himself considered important to depict. Ancestors. Family. Gustav's first wife was Catherine of Saxe-Lauenburg, whom he married on September 24, 1531. They had a son, Erik XIV, Duke of Kalmar. On October 1, 1536, he married his second wife, Margot Elia John Hufvud. Their children were, John III, Duke of Finland, Katarina, wife of Edward II, Count of Ostfriesland. A grandmother of Anna Maria of Ostfriesland and great-grandmother of Adolf Frederick II, Duke of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Cecilia, wife of Christopher II, Margrave of Baden-Rodemachern, Magnus, Duke of Asturga-Paragraphed Land, Karl, Anna Maria, wife of George John I, Count Palatine of Veldens, Sten, Sophia, wife of Duke Magnus II of Saxe-Lauenburg, Elisabeth, wife of Christopher, Duke of Mecklenburg-Gladbach, Charles IX, Duke of Saar-Paragraphed-Manland, at Vodstena Castle on August 22, 1552 he married his third wife, Katarina Stenbock. See also, City of Vasa, Early Vasa era, Vasa, Vasaloppet. Notes. References. Roberts, Michael, The Early Vasas, A History of Sweden 1523 1611, A Berg, Alf, Gustav Vasa 500 / the official anniversary book, Lars Olof Larsson, Gustav Vasa Landsvader Tyrann. External links, The Rapier of Gustav Vasa, King of Sweden, Robert Nisbet Bain. Gustav I Eriksson. Encyclopaedia Britannica. Gustavus I Vasa. New International Encyclopedia 1905. Gustavus I. The American Cyclopedia. 1879.